want to start off with a question. I'm going to start off with it every single day. What did you find interesting in the homework? And so this is an opportunity to make your extra credit point for today. Somebody be the first volunteer, raise your hand, I'll recognize you. Speak out, what did you find interesting in the homework for today? Yes, and tell me your name.
Marcus.
Marcus, what did you find interesting?
I had never really noticed all the parallels between John the Baptist and Elijah.
Yeah, so there are a lot of parallels in the story between John the Baptist and Elisha. And I think in the homework questions, I might have even had you look up some of those passages. And so in Mark, this would be really cool if I could get this to work the first time. In Mark and in John, you have the description of John the Baptist as Elijah. And it even says John was clothed with camel's hair and wore a leather belt around his waist. Now, for you and me as 21st century Americans, that just seems plain weird, doesn't it? Can I get a witness? Does that seem weird to you? You know, a guy out in the middle of nowhere wearing camel's hair and a leather belt around his waist. And the reason that's weird to us is because we're not Jews. If we were Jews who had grown up reading the Old Testament and a guy showed up with camel's hair and a leather belt around his waist, that would be really significant because that's the exact description in 2 Kings of Elijah. So there was a king there. He was a bad king, a godless king, and he worshiped foreign gods. And he had a crisis in his life, an accident, and he felt like he was dying. And so he sent messengers to a foreign god, a god named Baal-zebub. And you may have heard Beelzebub, that's where the name comes from. Beelzebul is another version of it. The Baal means Lord of, and then I always get confused here. One of these words means Lord of filth, and the other version means Lord of the flies. So if you've ever read that famous essay, The Lord of the Flies, that's where they get the name from. Beelzebub, Beelzebul. And so the king sent to this foreign god to find out if he was going to recover. And he meets Elijah. And the messengers come back to the king and they say, well, you know, what did Beelzebul say, or Beelzebub? And they said, well, we didn't go because this guy showed up and told us that you were going to die. And the king, the pagan king, the godless king said, well, what did the guy look like? And he said, well, the guy had a garment of hair and a leather belt around his waist. And the king says, that was Elijah the Tishbite. So when John 1, and when all the Gospels are presenting John the Baptist, they're presenting him as being the fulfillment of this Elijah the Tishbite figure. What's weird about Elijah the Tishbite is he's one of two people in the Old Testament who don't die, who doesn't die. And the first is Enoch. Enoch walked with God, and he was not. God took him. Elijah nearly the same thing happens. Elijah goes to the place where Moses was killed, and where God buried Moses. Elijah goes to that same place, and God sends a chariot to take him up to heaven. So Elijah's one of two people, and he doesn't die in the Old Testament. And when we come to the very end of the Old Testament, the very last thing that God says before 420 years of silence is, I'm going to send Elijah the prophet before this great and dreadful day of the Lord comes, and he will turn the hearts of the fathers to the children and the children to their fathers, lest I come and strike the land with a decree of utter destruction. Now, this word utter destruction, this last word that God says before 420 years of silence, is a really weird word in the Old Testament. It's a word you never want to read. It's the word cherem. And you ask, well, what is the word cherem? Cherem is, when God decreed for Israelite to completely wipe out the Canaanites. Have you ever read that story in the Old Testament? Don't leave anything alive. And you think, oh my goodness, that's that's so kind of out there. Well, it is out there, but it's the last word that God says in the Old Testament. I'm going to send this prophet Elijah, and the result is cherem is not going to happen to you, which is really good news, because you may or may not know in the story that Judah had married a Canaanite. You may or may not know in the story that all the people descended from Judah are half Canaanites. So when God says kill the Canaanites, and you're standing there with a spear in your hand and you're a Jewish person, it's like, well, do I kill myself because I'm half Canaanite? Now God says, I'm not worried about those people out there. It's you that I'm worried about. And what I'm going to do is send Elijah so that this doesn't happen. That's the very last word God says until this figure before Jesus shows up. And he comes and he's wearing a garment of hair and a leather belt. And, you might say, well, is this like Elijah reincarnated? I don't think so, because when John was asked, are you Elijah? John says no. But when Jesus was talking about John, he said to his disciples, if you're willing to bear it, he is the Elijah. So I think how we're to read that is that, no, he's not reincarnated Elijah, but he's certainly trying to help us connect these dots, that he's the promised figure that's going to come so that cherem will not happen. So, Marcus, that's a great question. Who else? What else do you find interesting about the homework? What do you find interesting? What do you find confusing? When you did the homework, did you have an aha moment there? Who? Yes.
I thought the parallel between Genesis and John was interesting. How in Genesis it was like the beginning of the world, where in John was the beginning of Jesus coming on the scene.
Right, and tell me your name.
Kelsey.
Sorry?
Kelsey.
What a great comment, Kelsey. That's absolutely right. There is a parallel between John 1:1-5 and Genesis 1:1-5. They both start with in the beginning. And in fact, in the Greek text, the New Testament is written in Greek originally, and the Old Testament was written in Hebrew, but not everybody could read Hebrew, and so eventually it was translated into Greek, and that translation is called the Septuagint. Sometimes you'll see it called the LXX. That's the Roman numeral for 70, because 72 people translated it in Alexandria in about 280 BC. Well, if you put these two texts together, they're exactly the same. NRK ein ha logos, NRK poiesin ha theos. These two are connected. And not only they're connected within the beginning, but they both talk about light and darkness. In him was life, and the light was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness. Can you see? God said, let there be light, and there was light. Can you see that that's connected? There, Kelsey, that's exactly right, that there's a connection here. But if you and I were Jews, there would be even more of a connection here. Because everyone who's ever come to the Hebrew text of Genesis 1 recognizes that in the very first verse, there's a massive problem. And it doesn't matter if you're reading Philo, it doesn't matter if you're reading the Targums, it doesn't matter if you're reading the Talmud. Anybody who comes to Genesis 1 and reads it in Hebrew is just struck in the face with a massive problem in Hebrew. And why that's important for us to talk about here is because all three of the world's monotheistic religions, Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, all agree that Genesis 1 is from God. I don't know if you knew that, but Muslims will affirm that Genesis 1 is from God. Jews affirm that Genesis 1 is from God. Christians affirm that Genesis 1 is from God. And so all three of the world's monotheistic religions agree that Genesis 1:1 comes from God. And if you take the entirety of the planet, half the people, 1 out of every 2 people, belongs to one of these religions. And they all agree that the text of Genesis 1 is from God. So if we were faced with the question from Islam or from Judaism, prove to me that your version, if you were born in a Muslim country, wouldn't you be saying the Quran was right and looking at that? Can the Bible stand up to careful study? Can it stand up to rigorous scrutiny? And I hope that if you're not a believer today, I hope that you ask that question. I want you to be a Berean and search the scriptures and to see if that is true. But I want to point out to you that there's a problem in Genesis 1. And I want to try to walk you through it. So I imagine if you're like most people, you look at this and you say, oh my goodness, that's the scariest thing I've ever seen. Well, it's true. This is an ancient language. In fact, it's within 600 years of being the oldest written thing on planet Earth. The only thing older than this are the hieroglyphics in the pyramids. This is an old language. And in fact, if it's as old as it claims to be, it's nearly 3,500 years old. This text was written 35 centuries ago, to put it in perspective. Most old languages are written from right to left, and the theory, I'm told, is that smart people were left-handed, and so the people who could write were writing left-handed. You can even tell when you learn Hebrew that it's much easier to write if you're left-handed than right. Even Greek was written that way. Something happened in antiquity, and most languages flipped. So Greek flipped, and so Greek is written left to right, and English is written left to right. But this is so old that it was written the way all languages were originally written, right to left. And the problem is right here with these first three words. And if you read this text in the original, and you come to these three words, it strikes you in the face, the problem with this text. Now, this is a very beautiful language. And if you want to know what it sounds like, I'm going to read it just out loud to you. This is what this 3,500-year-old language would have sounded like, as near as a Southern 21st century person can do it. But this is it. Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim va'et haaretz v'haaretz hayita tohu v'bohu v'hoshek al pnei tehom v'ruach Elohim merachefet al pnei chamayim v'yomer Elohim yehi or v'yehi or v'yar Elohim et haor kitov v'yavdel Elohim bein haor uvein hahoshek v'yikra Elohim laor yom ve'lahoshek kara layilah v'yihi erev v'yihi boker yom echad. Now that's a very beautiful language, isn't it? That is really old, 3,500 years old. And here's the problem. The problem is with these first three words. And I want to explain what the problem is, and you tell me what that has to do with anything, what that has to do with John. The very first word, remember we're reading this way, the very first word is this word, Bereshit. The be part of the word, this part of the word, means in. And the reshit part of the word means head, or in the beginning. When it all started, Bereshit. And there's not really much of a debate about that word. If you came, most anybody's going to tell you that should be translated in beginning. Not really much of a problem there. When we come to the next word, we come to this word bara. This is the second word in the Hebrew text. And the word bara means he created. Now, have any of you taken a foreign language before? What are some of the foreign languages that you've taken? Remember, you get points. If you speak up in a class, you get a point for being here. What have you? Spanish. What have you taken? Sign language. Sign language. Good. French. and another language, I think. Yes? Spanish, good. Greek, yes. Japanese, wow. That's pretty impressive. What is it? Kanjis? How many kanjis do you know? Well, that's good. That's more than I know. So, good. In English is different from a lot of other languages. And let me see if I can. I think I had this slightly out of order. In most languages, when you come to studying verbs, you have a chart like this. Do you remember a chart like this in Spanish? This is the Latin version. Amo, amas, amat, amamus, amantes, amant. I love, you love, he, she, or it loves. We love, you love, they love. Most languages in the world do their verbs that way. If you want to tell who's doing the action in the verb, you just add little stuff to the end of it or the beginning of it, and it'll tell you stuff about who's doing the action in the verb. All languages work that way. French works that way. Greek works that way. Latin works that way. German works that way. Did I say French? Aramaic, Syriac, Arabic, all do things just adding little bits to the verb, and it'll tell you something about who did it. Well, this is called a conjugation chart. And usually they're first person, second person, third person, singular and plural. Works that way all foreign languages that I know except English. This is the conjugation chart for Hebrew. Hebrew differentiates between men and women. So in Hebrew, which is really weird that, Latin's paradigm word is the word love. Hebrew's paradigm word is the word kill. So if you ever learn Hebrew, katal, katala, katalta, katalti, what are you saying? You're saying he killed. Get where I can draw on this again. What are you saying? Well, you're saying he killed. When you add nothing, it's a he. She killed. You man killed. You woman killed. I killed. They killed. You all men killed. You all women killed. We killed. So Hebrew and all Semitic languages will do that. Their verb chart is this very specific thing that will tell you lots and lots about who did the action. And what that means is when we come to the word bara, and there's no debate about this, like you don't have to be a Christian or anyone else, you just ask, what does the word bara? The word bara means he created. So when you get to the second word of the Bible, monotheism is established. There's one person, and he's describing himself as a man versus a woman, and that one person created. This is the sign that shows you what created. What did he create? He created the heavens and the earth. And for Jews, that's the way you say everything. So when you get two words into the Hebrew text, it's saying there's a person who's describing himself as a he, and that person is responsible for everything that exists. The heavens, the earth, people, spirits, everything. And he's one person. And you can tell that by this word bara. And there's no debate. Like everybody's going to, if it was they created, it would be baru. If it was she created, it would be bara. If it was you created, it would be baratim. But it isn't, it's bara. And so the only thing that word can mean, the only thing this word can mean is he created. And there's no problem with that. There's nothing difficult in that. The difficulty comes when we come to the next word. The difficulty, the massive difficulty comes when we come to the word Elohim. And everybody who's ever read the text, both ancient and modern, admits there's a massive problem here. And I'll bet that you know a little bit more about the Hebrew language than you think you know. At least some of you, I'll bet, know a little more. And you can tell me about that ending "im" in the story. Let's look at something. I think it's earlier here. How many of you have heard of the word cherub before? Okay, who can tell me what a cherub is? What is a cherub? You know, it's like some kind of souped up angel. There are two of them. Got a flaming sword, keep people out of the Garden of Eden, right? Cherubs on top of the Ark of the Covenant. Cherubs are on the veil of the temple, that veil that was torn in two when Jesus died on the cross. If you have one of those creatures, it's called a cherub. What are they called if you have more than one cherub? Right. You add "im" to the end of it, and it will convert this word into being the plural of that word. One cherub is a cherub. A bunch of cherubs are cherubim. There are creatures in Isaiah 6. Nobody knows what they are, but they're on fire in God's presence. This is also the word for those serpents that bite the Israelites in the desert and they die. And they're flying. And they're in God's presence and they're on fire and they're proclaiming constantly, glory, glory, glory. Some people think those cherubs are on fire with love for God. And that could be it. Some people think that they're actually God's enemies and God's punishing them in his presence. And if that's the case, I'm like Isaiah, I'm terrified. We don't know. The only place we meet him is in Isaiah 6. But it says they have 6 wings and they cover themselves and they cover their bodies and they say, holy, 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 and they're on fire. One of those creatures is called a seraph. What are a bunch of those creatures called? Seraphim. In other words, when you add a hirik yod mem on the end of any word, it converts it from being a singular to a plural. You can take the word horse, sus, and if you want to say a bunch of horses, you add im to the end and it makes it horses. Oddly enough, in Hebrew, the word dog means fish. That's weird, isn't it? Well, you got one fish. What's a bunch of fishes? Dogim. Okay, tell me then the connection between the word God, Eloah, and the word Elohim. What's the difference between those two words? The word Elohim has hirik yod mem on the end of it. So, what would you think the normal translation of Elohim? And you heard it, did you not, when I read the text? Bereshit bara Elohim, merahefet Elohim, vayar Elohim. You can see every single one of those times in the text. Is the version singular or is it plural? You tell me, singular or plural. If we were just translating the word Elohim by itself, we would translate the term many gods. In fact, if you want to say two gods, there's a way, Elohim, you add another vowel to it. So Elohim means more than two Eloah. And there's our problem, isn't it? Because we've already seen that bara can only mean he created, but when it explains who the he is, it writes the word gods. And there's our problem, isn't it? You can see our problem. That feature occurs 6,000 times in the Hebrew Bible. That God is this he figure who equally, eternally, absolutely is also a they. The God of the Bible is presenting himself as an I, we. And you tell me which one of the world's three monotheistic religions teaches that truth from Scripture. Can you see what John is doing? In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God. Okay, there was plurality there. There was a relationship there. There's God, and then there's this figure of the Logos, the Word. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God. And then it says the Word was God. The same was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him, and without him not one thing was made which was made. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not overcome it. The person of Jesus isn't just Jesus meek and mild. The person Jesus isn't just the offspring of Mary. The person of Jesus is the Creator God. This plurality within the more basic unity of God, or maybe that's even wrong to say it this way, this person within the plurality of the one God of monotheism took to himself human flesh. And he lived under his own law, and he never sinned once in thought, word, or deed. And then just like Adam, he comes to a tree, only it's not the living tree of Adam, it's a dead tree. And just like Adam, he's stripped naked, but then by being murdered, he unmurders anybody who would ever come to him by faith. How can we know that the Bible is true? I think there are lots of ways to know that the Bible is true. Look at what the Bible does in the lives of those who embrace it the most. Look at the good the Bible has brought to those who are willing to submit to its teaching the most. How do we know the Bible is true? The Bible talks about the inner witness of God. All those things are true, but I can tell you this, that a major way we can know the Bible is true is the fact that the Bible, that Christianity, explanation of Christianity, makes the details of the Bible make sense. I became a Christian when I was 18 years old, the week that I left for state college, or had a crisis in my life, and God showed up. But I desperately needed to know, is the Bible true? Is the Bible worth betting your life on? And as a student at a state university, what I was often taught in classes was the Bible is not true. The Bible is full of problems. The Bible is full of things that just don't make sense. But when I began studying the Bible and I began to read the Bible, I began to see this beauty, this connection, this meta-narratival elegance that I just could not explain unless there was a God who knew the end from the beginning and built in the details of Scripture from the very first words, things that would ultimately be revealed. The truth of the Bible, B.B. Warfield said, is like a lavishly furnished room dimly lit. And progressive revelation isn't that the meaning of the text changes. Progressive revelation is that more candles come into the room and you begin to see what the sovereign God, the treasures the sovereign God had put there from the beginning for us to find. That's what we're going to study in this class. We're going to study the meta-narrative elegance. We're going to study the way that the New Testament makes the Bible make sense. And rather than do it by my construction, we're going to just read the text. And we're going to look at the words as they come along. So when you look at the homework for Wednesday, you'll see that we're in John 1 again, so go back and reread it. And we're going to look at some of the other things that John 1 picks up. And so I'll see you on Wednesday. If you made an extra credit point, put a check by your name, and I'll see you on Wednesday.